Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Troy Allen with TekStream. We will begin the webinar in about 1 minute. Just give a chance for everybody to get logged in. Thank you for joining us. And like I said, we'll get started in 1 minute. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's webinar. I am Troy Allen with TekStream Solutions, and we're going to be talking about IT resilience in uncertain times, specifically talking about CloudEndure Disaster Recovery. I'm the VP of Emerging Technologies here at TekStream, and have been working in IT supporting enterprise solutions since 1997. And TekStream over the past 3 or 4 years has really been focused very heavily on AWS and different services that they bring to the table. And over the past little while, have been focusing on CloudEndure for its disaster recovery and migration services. And I'm happy to announce that joining us today in this conversation, we have Garrett Pollard. Garrett, you want to give a quick introduction to everybody?
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Troy. Again, I'm Garrett Pollard. I am the CloudEndure Disaster Recovery Specialist here on the AWS team. We work quite a bit with TekStream around all of our DR customers in the Southeast, just because they know what they're doing, and we're very excited to be doing this webinar and our ongoing partnership with them, and really excited to open up this discussion today.
Thanks. I appreciate you joining, and hopefully this will be a good conversation for everybody. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We do welcome questions as we are going through the webinar. If you do have a question, you should see a chat window in your GoToMeeting environment. So please post any questions that you have. We'll either address them at that time, or we'll save all questions for the end. So hopefully this will be very informative for you today, and we'll go ahead and get started. So when we think about disaster recovery, it's really about understanding what the impact is to your business continuity. And there's some key considerations that really need to be taken into account. Looking at those considerations, it's how do you access your systems? What are the VPN devices? What does your internet speed look like? How are you connecting to on-site servers through laptops or desktop computers? And how do you host user connections through all that? Another consideration is the availability of the resources. And this ranges from the physical resources that keep your systems up and running to the human resources that work with those physical elements. So you always want to make sure that you've got proper access to those resources, you've got the appropriate system management in place, and physical system access in traditional on-premise environments. And when you take a look at what's happening around the world today, there's a lot of challenges with people actually being able to go into facilities to work, and that becomes a concern. And so when you look at your business continuity, any way that you can automate and take that human element out of some of the menial tasks and allow operations to be driven through that automation, it sets the stage for better business continuity down the line. So how seamless are these online activities that you're doing? How much intervention actually comes into play with those? How much management and oversight is required? And then obviously, what is the communication around your business continuity? How are you keeping informed with employees? Are they being notified of the situations that require their response or knowledge of what's happening? How does IT monitoring play inside? And what are the insights that you have to general operations? So these are some of the baseline considerations that you need to be thinking about, specifically when you start looking at your disaster recovery strategies. Now, I do want to mention and talk a little bit about the differences between backup and disaster recovery. For a lot of organizations, when we talk to them, what is your disaster recovery strategy? Oh, we take backups. Well, backups are good, and they definitely have a place, and you should be doing those. But backups in and of themselves are not a disaster recovery strategy. They're an element of that strategy. So when you think about backups, it's really about how do you copy and protect data and applications so that they could be restored. And there's various ways that you can do that in different types of backup operations, such as doing full backups or incremental, maybe differential or mirrored. And all of those help to maintain the persistence and the safety of your data or images of your systems, but it doesn't address how do you actually put those backups into a new active system. So having the backup is basically, if you think of the old days, I've got a tape backup, I throw it in a safe, and now there's an issue. How do I get around that? Well, I got to stand up a new system. I got to put the tape drivers on it. I got to load the tape, bring everything back on, then get online, validate, and test it. So there's a lot of mechanics that go beyond just capturing the data and storing it somewhere. Backup also drives a lot of your data retention and archival process. So it is very important. And a lot of times you can have regulations of having information near time or off-site storage for a certain amount of time. And how do you manage those? And good backup applications will drive the policies around that retention policy and how long you keep them, when you clean them out, things of that nature. But one important thing to remember, and we talked about this just briefly, is backup restore is typically have a longer recovery time objective and a recovery point objective. And that's because the backup itself has to have some place to go to. So there's usually some prep work to get systems back up in place in order to do that. Sometimes that is a manual process. So as I mentioned, backup is a significant part of your disaster recovery strategy. But disaster recovery really is a comprehensive roadmap, if you will, of what you are going to do and what systems you have in place to automate the recovery of your applications and data in the event of an emergency. And you have to have a rapid RTO and RPO for those systems in the event of an outage, especially if it's mission critical information. Most companies are looking for as quick as possible, whether that's a 5-minute, 10-minute, 30-minute, depending upon what your applications and the data associated with it are doing. You may have different SLAs for your recovery time and recovery point objectives. And as I mentioned before, backup is a strategy, or backup is a part of the overall disaster recovery strategy. But you also need to have a definition of how that would be used in the overall business continuity. And that's taken in place in a view of, how do you recover those systems? How do you get them back online? What switchovers do you have to do? Who's in charge of that? How are you automating it? And you need to make sure that you're taking into account all of the ancillary devices and other applications that need to connect with the particular application or data set that is not offline. So quite often, especially these days, an application does not operate in a silo. We are sharing information and data from system to system to system to system across our enterprise. And so when you do a recovery from a disaster point, you have to ensure all those connections are put in place so that it becomes seamless. And through automation, you can ensure that any network changes or things of that nature that have to take place can be put in position so that that transition is as seamless as possible from your production system to your disaster recovery. So backups, just to go back over that, is making sure that you have the appropriate copies of your data and applications. But disaster recovery really spells out how you're going to restore from those backups and how you're going to ensure the rest of the environment is built back up through automation, auto-connected, and then cut over so that you have that technical and business continuity. So some of the common disaster recovery challenges that we see organizations face is it's a diverse infrastructure and many different operating system types. So, if you say we're a Microsoft shop, I will guarantee that you're going to find servers on different versions of Microsoft. Or if you're a Linux shop, you're going to have multiple flavors and multiple versions of those flavors of Linux across the board. And so a method that might work for one may not work for the other. And those are things that you have to take into account for. There's also going to be machine compatibility issues. In the old days when you had a disaster recovery site, the rule of thumb was whatever your QA environment or your production environment, you had to have the same hardware and equipment for your disaster recovery. When you go into systems like CloudEndure, that doesn't always have to be the case, because you can go through virtualized containers and things of that nature that makes it far easier and takes that machine compatibility issues out of the equation to a large extent. The other consideration that people were often looking at, even coming from an on-premise environment, was the amount of time it takes to recover workloads. As we talked about in the difference between backup and DR strategy, there's a lot that goes into bringing systems online. And when you're building out your strategy, you really need to map out all those connection points, all of the things that go into ensuring the system's up. And one of the nice things that you'll see about CloudEndure is it lends itself for doing what we like to call infrastructure as code in order to build up those systems and move the data and the applications to those so that you can have a very quick response time for it. And usually your workloads are continually changing. So even if you are doing backups, you might be doing them on an hourly incremental. There might be times that you're losing a little bit of data in between, and that's always a consideration that you have to keep in mind. And hopefully today you'll learn about how that risk can be mitigated through the tools that we're going to be discussing. This is a big one: inadequate testing and drills. I've talked to many organizations where, do you have a disaster recovery? Yes, absolutely we do. Great. When did you test it? Oh, when we put it in place the first time. Fantastic. How long ago was that? Oh, 3 years. Let's think about that. So you really, in order to ensure that you are going to meet your requirements for a switch over, from a production to a disaster recovery system, you got to test it. You got to drill it. You got to know that it is going to work. And that's also one of the benefits that hopefully you'll see today is with tools like CloudEndure, it makes it very easy to do some of that testing and to switch up and see that what you have put into place is actually working and it's going to facilitate your needs so that in the event of a real emergency, you have the confidence that you're covered. And then, obviously, in a traditional on-premise environment, there is a high cost of duplicating the infrastructure and licensing, even in a virtual world. So, even with VMs and things of that nature, there's still infrastructure that sits behind that you have to consider. So there's so many tools out there that are labeled DR, and some applications have their own. And you really need to look at what do they mean by disaster recovery, for those tool sets. As we discussed, some of them are really just an automation of backup, where others do the full gamut of utilities and services that you need to quickly get up and running. So you want to investigate what those tools are actually doing for you and how they operate. And that would address, the inability that quite often people find by surprise, that, when they think they've got the tool set that's going to do it, and the first time they actually go to run it, realize that it's taking twice as long as we expected or anticipated in order to get a server up and running with all the data loaded on it. And that's going back to the testing and the drills, and actually timing out exactly what it's going to take to bring these systems online really becomes critical. So there's a question that a lot of organizations, especially if they're got a large footprint on premise or in a colo data center, is what is the advantage of just doing our disaster recovery and on premise versus doing it in a cloud? And there's some misconceptions on both sides, but one of the things to think about from an on-premise is all of your data is accessed without having to go to the outside world. In a perfect world, that would be the case. Quite often, people do not have data centers sitting at their corporate office. They're in colo facilities. So unless you have a dedicated network pipe going from your corporate office to the colo data center, you're still going to go through some public interface most often in order to get to it. So it's not always a given that it's direct access without internet. There are some hurdles, obviously, to the on-premise for setting up DR. There's the cost associated with the servers, the network. It kind of goes back to in the traditional days of on-premise, when you build out an application, you build it out for max capacity, because scaling in a physical world obviously is a challenge, and you want to limit how many times you're going into the guts of a system to add memory or to add other physical services and so forth to that. So with your DR system, you have those same capital investments that you are concerned with. And as your production systems grow, you want to make sure that your DR is in support of that new infrastructure and architecture to support increased demands in the event of a cutover. Now, it doesn't have to be 100% mirrored, but you need to ensure that you're able to handle the bulk of your transaction requirements in a DR situation. And then obviously, if you're in a data center or a colo, there's always the overhead that comes in and play with that. And if you have a requirement for doing geographic redundancy, from coast to coast, there's a higher cost associated with that. Because let's say that you've got a data center, situated on the East Coast, and you want to have DR on the West Coast, or you want to have DR option 1 on the East Coast, DR option 2 on the West Coast, that you're just compounding the cost investment in order to support those systems associated with it. Now, if you take a look at the cloud, obviously, the physical hardware is quite often handled as part of the service. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with EC2 and AWS. that's their compute instances, if you will, that's sitting on the cloud. You don't have to worry about buying the big beast of a stack of iron that is holding all of these EC2 instances. You're paying for the EC2 instance itself, and somebody else is taking care of the cost of that hardware and maintaining and keeping its lights on. But this also lends itself very easily to scalability. And that's one of the powers that cloud services like AWS really bring to the table. No longer do you have to provision for your max capacity. You provision for your expected capacity on any given day, and then you've got a wide variety of methods that you can dynamically scale, not just in your production environment, but you can deploy those same methods to your disaster recovery. Quite often, you might be in a situation where you've got an outage in production, you switch over to your disaster recovery, and for whatever reason, maybe you need to run there for a day or 2 days or 3 days, and maybe it's during HR benefit renewal when that happens. Worst possible time, and for most companies, that's the highest utilization of internal systems. Well, it'd be great if your DR could scale just as easily as your production system could. And because of those automated scaling capabilities, you only pay for what you use, not for that overall capacity. So as you go up and you go down, you're only paying for the compute that you're actually utilizing in those situations. And the cloud natively lends itself for that geographic redundancy. So you've got multiple layers of redundancy in AWS. You've got your regions, you've got your availability zones, but you've got regions that are across the board. And quite frankly, there might be certain pieces of your infrastructure that have very specific geographic requirements. And having regions globally and so many of them means that you can really choose where you want to hold that DR. Sometimes maybe based upon price, might be based upon service availability, it might be based upon how close it is to the bulk of your workers, or maybe if you're decentralized across the geographic area, you may want to have multiple DRs to facilitate those certain areas. And then the automation and the support behind the scenes to reduce management overhead, where AWS is taking care of a lot of the service and doing things on your behalf that normally you would have to do in a data center or a colo facility. They're taking care of that behind the scenes. Now, there are some hurdles that could be argued either way. One is internet connection required for data. Well, yes. But as we talked about on-premise, that may be the case for on-premise as well. But the reality is there are tools and services that you can leverage to mitigate that, such as utilizing virtual private networks. You can do direct connect services, just like you could with an on-premise environment, dedicated pipes going into the cloud arena so that you're protecting your bandwidth and you're protecting your connectivity so that it's isolated to you. So there are ways to kind of get around that. And I'm going through the internet. Well, yeah, but you're going through it a very either dedicated route or a very highly protected route. And then data security controls, typically come into question. One of the biggest things that come to mind is if I'm going to the cloud, I may have GDPR that is a concern for me. Well, when you look at a vendor like AWS, where you've got so many different options from a regional perspective, quite often you can handle those GDPR requirements for data tenancy in a particular region or within a particular country. Will take care of that. Okay, so there's many different paths that people take to looking at a cloud-based disaster recovery. Sometimes it is they're going through a hardware refresh and they're looking at the cost of their on-premise or their colo data centers and having to refresh hardware across the board. It's an extra expense. And that could be a catalyst for looking, is there a better way? Maybe I want to keep my production systems here, but the VR environment, would I want to put the expense into updating the servers when I can get service parity and even better than what I'm doing on premise in the cloud? You may already start your transition to the cloud and move in other capabilities, and you're building your cloud skill set, and are realizing some of the benefit there, and doing your disaster recovery is kind of a logical step. There's other things such as being able to improve your recovery objectives. As we talked about, with on-premise, or depending upon how you had traditionally set up your disaster recovery strategy, your recovery point and times that are required for it may not be meeting the demands of regulations or your customers or your business objectives, and you need a faster, better way of doing it. So, Garrett, I've just kind of addressed a few of these, but in your experience, I'm sure there's a lot of other reasons that kind of lead people to a cloud-based DR solution. Maybe you could take a moment and just highlight some of the ones that you've seen in your experience.
Yeah, very good topic here. And a lot of times when people are looking into the cloud, it's just been years and years of more of that traditional data center disaster recovery, where there's a lot of responsibility on their shoulders to maintain a data center. A lot of overhead costs around cooling, equipment, people, just general upkeep. I mean, a lot of that comes into play, and it can get very expensive. So when they realize that the path to the cloud, there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of cost savings, and we typically see a lot of folks try to take advantage of that, and really not only save money, but maximize productivity, and just keep innovating at a faster pace, because that's what everyone's doing these days.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of that as well. So in the next slide, Garrett, I think you're going to be talking about a little bit more about the CloudEndure and what that means, with being better, faster, and more affordable solution for many clients that you've worked with. But I'm going to kind of turn it over to you and kind of let you walk through this a little bit with us.
Perfect. Thank you, Troy, for running through the DR 101, if you will. And it's really good to understand that going into this CloudEndure discussion, because we're going to talk a little more about CloudEndure and really the benefits of using CloudEndure in the cloud. To really kick things off here, to understand the CloudEndure's place in this ecosystem here, we are focused on cloud recovery, and CloudEndure DR is a solution that enables customers to have point-in-time failover capabilities directly into AWS, EBS, and EC2, with the goal of significantly reducing costs without having to sacrifice enterprise-grade resiliency. The best way to really kind of go through this and discuss the real benefit behind using CloudEndure, I like to discuss them in the 3 technology pillars that support the product, with being flexible, reliable, and highly automated. To really kick things off, we'll start with flexible. I think that's something that's very attractive to many people. The important thing to know about CloudEndure is that we operate at the OS level, and this provides us a great deal of flexibility. So when it comes to protecting machines, we can protect physical, virtual, cloud-based machines. We can also give our customers the ability to utilize CloudEndure literally from any source into AWS. So this is a great asset as you develop a DR strategy that's not just built for the present, but built for the future as your environment and strategies evolve. When it comes to compatibility, a good rule here, we support a wide range of OSs, applications, and databases. So the good rule is, as long as the machine is Windows or Linux based, we support it in AWS. Generally, we're good to go. Lastly, we not only provide the ability to fail over for DR purposes, but we can also give our customers the ability to fail back once that disaster is resolved. So the next pillar that we'll talk about here is reliability, probably the most important characteristic that you would want when talking about DR and overall continuity strategy in general. We're able to do everything that we'll talk about here today without impacting performance. There will also be no disruption or reboot of source machines required. Another important thing to know about CloudEndure is that we utilize continuous block level replication. So we're able to capture any individual block level change that happens at the source as soon as it happens and sync it with the target. And this is how we're able to provide sub-second RPOs. And we can also deliver an RTO of minutes. And as I did allude to in the beginning of this slide here, we do provide point-in-time recovery options. This is excellent. Some of the things that Troy covered, this is really important to protect against things like malicious attacks, like ransomware, even corruptions or human errors. And the last pillar here, highly automated, it speaks for itself, plain and simple. CloudEndure Disaster Recovery is just easy to use. We also provide non-disruptive testing capabilities. As we know, it is a hot button topic here, so we'll be able to provide that very easily. We'll be able to spin up a machine just like we would in a real life failover without impacting source or target to really give you that peace of mind. And of course, in all things cloud, when it does come to cost, we leverage cloud economics and AWS EC2 to provide low-cost solutions without sacrificing that enterprise-grade resiliency. And we do this by using a lightweight staging area in EC2 that utilizes a low-cost instance type, a T3 smalls, for those who are familiar, to really be cost-effective. Excuse me. So for the next slide, we're going to dive into really how we do what we do and really talk about the life cycle of CloudEndure Disaster Recovery. So when I walk through the CloudEndure DR life cycle, a few things to keep in mind, because we're very excited about our partnership with TekStream, because there's so much that they can help with when actually deploying CloudEndure Disaster Recovery. Because really the thing I'd like to point out is sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And it's good to have a valued partner to really help guide you along the way and make sure things are done right the first time. So as I mentioned earlier, you'll see at the bottom of the slide, I said we are any source into AWS, meaning we can be on-prem, failing over into AWS. If you have your workloads in AWS already, we can do region to region or AZ to AZ. We can even do cross-cloud. So really, to get things started, the best way to go about this is really just starting with an assessment, mapping the environment here. And this is something that TekStream can certainly help you with. And there's many ways to go about reviewing all of this by looking at well-architected plans, utilizing a discovery or analysis tool. We really want to make sure that before we go into a project that we understand the scope of the project, identify the servers, networking, the instance right sizing, really defining that recovery objective. And this is really critical to a successful deployment. And again, this is something that TekStream is very proficient in conducting. So once we do map that environment and prepare the CloudEndure prerequisites, we'll then deploy the agents on the OS of the machines that we're looking to protect. This really helps us communicate with the management console that resides within AWS. Once the environment in AWS is ready, we'll then begin replication over whatever connection is provided directly from source to the target. Replication can be throttled as well. And for security purposes, data is also being encrypted and compressed. Once everything is replicated, we'll then go into continuous data replication mode. So any individual block level change is recognized at the source and immediately synced with the target. So at this point, your data will stay in this low cost state until a failover occurs, and that's the only time you pay for the full compute resources. Before we can fail over, though, we do need to assemble our automation or our blueprint. It's more, if you're familiar with AWS, it's more similar to a CloudFormation template. And this is really what tells those servers not only where they're going, but what they need to be when you do failover. It asks for a lot of information like subnets, key addresses, security groups, instance types, everything that we may have discovered in that discovery process. This can be done manually, but we are built for scale. So utilizing these discovery analysis tools are very, very useful. You can actually export the information that it gathers and import it in for our purposes. And we also make our APIs available if that's a direction that folks would like to go with. But as I wrap things up here, now that the blueprint is put together, we want to use that testing feature. It's not just used for ongoing DR drills. We also want to make sure during onboarding that everything is set up and works the way it should. So at this point, we're now in a state of DR readiness. And CloudEndure, as I mentioned, provides point-in-time recovery options. So when you do initiate a failover, you can actually pick from 60 different recovery points over the last 30 days. And again, when you think about the craziness of malicious attacks with ransomware, things like that, this is very valuable, as well as any other reasons you would have to restore from a different point in time. But once you do select that recovery point, we'll kickstart our automation and spin everything up in the matter of minutes. And once that DR event is resolved, we can give you the ability to fail back, which essentially is what we just do originally, but in reverse. But that's really keeping things high level here. I'll hand things back over to Troy and continue on.
Excellent. Thanks, Garrett. So obviously we've given you guys a lot of information so far today. So, we want to extend an offer to you guys as you were taking a look at your disaster recovery needs. Some of you might already be looking at options to streamline your strategies, maybe redefine those, or you're looking at a way to test out cloud and doing disaster recovery or even on small workload migrations is a great way to get started and start realizing the benefits. Or you might be going through hardware refresh, and this is a great opportunity to look at a different strategy. So just a quick commercial about TekStream, and I promise to keep this brief. TekStream really focuses on a wide variety of platforms, and that brings a lot of benefit to our clients because over the 10 plus years, we've had a tremendous amount of experience working with enterprise applications, residing on AWS, working with large enterprise projects through Highland, LifeRay, Oracle, and Splunk. And with all of those, they tend to be critical systems that have a very strong DR focus that's associated with it for that business continuity. So as an organization, we help support a multitude of environments and platforms, not just disaster recovery, but migration services, implementation, code from scratch, things of that nature, and helping organizations obtain the appropriate technology and software to meet their needs, but then actually being able to implement those, whether it's doing simple upgrades, migrations, or net new builds, and then making sure that you are in a situation where you're completely supported once all the work is done. So we offer a couple of different support options that tend to go above and beyond what you might get from your application vendor or your cloud vendor. Because quite often you've tweaked it, you've customized it. It's very specific to how you do business. And while the application and platform providers are going to ensure that the baseline operations, the infrastructure and whatnot is in place and it's operational, those specific changes that you've made to your organization or continually make to your organization need a way for that to be supported, something we help in. And then quite often we find organizations that need an extra set of hands, whether that's as a full-time employee or just to augment their staff. Or we might be in a situation where there's a particular application that need an expert to come in and help facilitate for a little bit. That's where our sourcing side comes in. So from that perspective, we're able to help our clients in many different venues by relying on these 4 pillars that you see to ensure that you're getting the right resource, you're getting the right technology, and you're getting the right support to accomplish your goals. Now, another thing that we bring to the table, and Garrett kind of alluded to this, is we want to help you get started in your disaster recovery strategy much faster. And sometimes people just want to try it before they buy it. They want to see what it's going to look like, right? Before they make a large investment to take the entire data center and move it into a new DR strategy. So we're offering a DR POC where we will work with you to take the workload from on-premise and move it to the AWS cloud for the disaster recovery concept. So as part of this, we'll help you to configure your environment if you don't already have one. We'll configure CloudEndure as part of the process, and the workload, we'll target 3 servers and drives associated with that, and really run through all the bases. So, doing the assessment that Garrett talked about, setting up the blueprints, getting the initial data transformation, data migration done, getting the real-time block migration activated, and then actually going through a situation where the production or quote-unquote production environment goes down for whatever reason. What does it look like to do the switch over? And one thing that Garrett mentioned that people often forget about is people are running on a DR, there's been updates to it, there's new transactions and whatnot. How do you get that back to the original production system? So being able to see that in action really opens some eyes to the capabilities of these type of solutions. So that's something that we bring to the table. But this tool set is not just for DR. It also will assist you in just doing cloud migration. So we also have what we call a fresh start cloud migration, very similar in nature. We will help you set up your AWS infrastructure, make sure you get best practices in place, such as using Control Tower, and stand up CloudEndure for the migration services. Again, work with the target workload and let you fully realize what that's going to look like running up in the cloud and seeing how quickly that can be done. So it's a very low cost way to do a toe dip and see what it's all about and what its capabilities are, and will quite often lead to a path of growth and automation and further capabilities for you. So looking to see if we have any questions, and if you do have questions, please feel free to provide those in the chat. But Garrett, I do have a couple that I just wanted to talk to you about. A lot of times when people are talking about disaster recovery, databases come up. I mean, databases are the backbone of just about every application out there. So how can CloudEndure, and its DR capabilities help protect databases?
That is a very good question. And honestly, we protect a lot of databases. As you mentioned before, when it comes to compatibility, as long as they're Windows or Linux based and going into AWS EBS EC2, we can absolutely support them. There are a few things that we will make note of, and this is part of the initial engagement, is understanding these databases, understanding what kind of connectivity we will have to the cloud, what change rate these databases have, because all these will certainly impact being able to keep up with them. It's not necessarily anything that has to do with CloudEndure. It's just making sure that the proper infrastructure is in place to support what you're looking to do. But databases, absolutely. One thing I will also make note of, we do not support RDS. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
Okay. Well, and that makes sense. But looking at the database, if you've got a database installed on a core iron system or even in a VMware environment, being able to migrate that in that situation to another virtualized container or into EC2 sounds like that is definitely on target, is what you're saying.
Correct.
So I did have one other question, and we get this a lot in that, okay, we're moving to the cloud, we're replicating our data in real time up to the cloud, and we know that it's at block, down at the block level that we're moving it. What happens if I lose that connectivity? What does CloudEndure do to protect us?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, luckily nothing will happen. We do have alerts that we will let you know that something's wrong, that we lost connectivity. And really what will happen at that point is once we do reestablish that connection, CloudEndure will still maintain your data in the target side. It's just a matter of us going back and doing a quick rescan just to see what we may have missed in between dropping that connection. And then we'll do our best to catch things back up and running again. But, it's all part of IT. These things do happen, but we want to make sure that we'll let you know that it happened, and we'll quickly get things back up and running as well. So it's not a problem from a CloudEndure perspective.
Okay. So I was at a meeting the other day and had a question come up, and that is, how much bandwidth do I really need, to consider this, to do the stand up of CloudEndure, move my data from on-premise into the cloud? And my thought on this is, obviously during that initial load, depending upon how much data that you're going to move, that is going to take some time and it's going to take some bandwidth. But one thing you said that I think is really important is you have the ability to throttle that or to control the flow. I think that's a point worth revisiting and maybe just highlighting just a little bit, because once you do the initial load, you're talking about just blocks that are moving on a regular basis. So you don't have this massive push. It's just real time, keeping things in sync. But for the initial part, can you maybe talk a little bit about that? Did I lose you, Garrett?
Oops, sorry, I was on mute. Could you repeat that question again so I fully understand it?
Yeah. So when you get started and you're doing that initial load, right, from on-premise to the cloud, the question always comes up around bandwidth. And when you were talking earlier, you said something I thought that was very important that is worth re-mentioning, and that is being able to essentially control the flow of the faucet, during that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, right out of the box, CloudEndure is going to use whatever you give it. So, if you give it all the bandwidth, or if you have that connectivity, we're going to use as much of it as we can to move as quickly as we can. But we are able to control that spigot. So we do allow you to throttle that bandwidth in the event that, it's not something you want us to do. So we won't go and consume all of that, obviously not without your permission.
Yeah, that's a great point. Then there's other things that you can do, obviously, to help increase. If you have very large data sets and very large workloads and a huge number of servers, that might be a consideration. You want to look at something like Direct Connect, so you have dedicated pipe or dedicated VPN channels to move these workloads through. So there are some infrastructure-oriented things that we can do to assist with that. Well, I think we are just about at time that we've allotted for today. Again, a lot of really good information. Really appreciate you guys listening in with us, and hopefully, you'll have some further thoughts and maybe some questions to reach out to us with. So please feel free to contact us, we've got some links here and our email addresses. Feel free to reach out to Garrett or myself. We'll be happy to help you. Yeah, Garrett, I appreciate you taking the time. I know things have been crazy busy for you, and spending a little bit of time with us to walk through this. We're excited about it. Our clients that we're working with are very excited about it. And it's just a great tool that's really solving some critical problems with organizations on how they keep their business continuity going. Garrett, any final thoughts before we close out for the day?
No, I mean, it was a pleasure being involved here, and honestly, you have an excellent team here with TekStream, Troy and his team, and we're here to also support any efforts as well. So looking forward to working together, and yeah, thanks for having us. It was a good webinar.
All right, perfect. Well, that concludes our webinar for the day. So we really appreciate you all attending and look forward to future webinars. And like I said, if you need to get in touch with us, our information is on the screen. Feel free to reach out. We are here to help. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.